Getting big distance is a dream for so many players, and throwing Anhyzer is the easiest way to do it right off the bat. Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome to episode 24 of Teach Play Disc Golf, a Gladiator Disc Golf podcast. I'm your host Antonio, and I am so excited to have you with me here today. I have some really fun stuff planned. As you heard in the opener, we're going to be talking about throwing Anhyzer. After that, I want us to take a moment and basically just discuss, because everybody in the disc golf world is talking about it this week. Let's go ahead and let's discuss who is the best disc golfer this season, especially mainly focusing in the MPO division. After that, we will recap Idlewild, and then we will close out the episode by previewing DGLO, or the Discraft Great Lakes Open. That is a fun one, and I can't wait to talk about that. But that is episode 24, so let's go ahead and let's get right into it. Alrighty, so like I said in the opener, truthfully, for most players, the best way to get biggest distance is to throw with Anhyzer, or to throw a disc that turns a lot. We hear a lot about, I even talk about this, throwing an understable disc. Hyzer flip is one way to do it, to kind of control just how much turn you get. But basically, one thing you see a lot of players do, especially on the Pro Tour, is they take a disc and they throw it on Anhyzer. So I want us to focus on not just how to get distance, okay? Because there's a whole lot that comes with getting distance. But one aspect of that, and really the main focus of what we're going to talk about in this episode, is how to throw Anhyzer with each of the different stabilities. We have an understable disc, a neutral disc, and an overstable disc. So we're going to start with overstable, because for the most part, in zero wind, I shouldn't say in zero wind, but for the most part of what we see, especially on the Pro Tour, we see a lot of professionals taking overstable discs for some of these big max distance shots. Now, if there's a tailwind, they're going to throw something a little flippier because the tailwind will help that. But in any other situation, we see most pros taking an overstable disc. Now, how are they throwing it on Anhyzer and then thereby getting maximum distance? They are throwing a flex line. And what that means when you're taking an overstable disc and throwing a flex line, it means that you are taking that overstable disc and having it and throwing it on Anhyzer angle. Now, what Anhyzer is, in case you're unaware, is if you have the disc flat, let me grab a sample disc here. For those of you that are watching video, and I'll describe this for those listening to the audio, a flat shot is exactly what it sounds. The disc is, flat. If you're throwing hyzer, the outside of the disc is pointed down. If you're throwing Anhyzer, the outside of the disc is pointed up on release. So when the disc is coming out of your hand, the outside of the disc is going to be higher or above your hand for the Anhyzer line. And what that's going to do is it's going to force a disc for a right hand backhand to pan from left to right. This is really ideal when you're trying to get around a corner with a backhand, or in this case, when you're throwing a flex line. You see, on a flex line, you're going to choose an overstable disc, because the overstable disc will carry that Anhyzer line you're putting it on, but the stability of it is going to fight out to finish flat, and depending on just how overstable the disc is, may even come back and fade. And so you often hear a lot of the S shape, putting some turn or Anhyzer on the disc, and then it fades out and it forms this sort of S shape. Depending how you look at it, it could be backwards, but that's how you would throw an overstable disc on Anhyzer. Now, there are some pros and cons to this, and obviously a pro is going to be, you're going to get a lot of distance out of this, because as long as you give it enough height, the disc is going to work to fight out of that line. So it's going to carry a little bit more. The downside to this is that if you're unfamiliar with the disc you're using on the flex line, it's possible that it will fade out of the turn too soon. And what that means is you're expecting it to turn a lot more, and then all of a sudden it's going to start fading, and basically you're going to completely miss your line. And when an overstable disc starts fading, it's going to keep going left. So you're going to get really far off the fairway, possibly OB, possibly even lose your disc. So that is the risk with throwing an overstable disc on Anhyzer. Now, the other way to throw Anhyzer is with a neutral disc. And now when I'm talking here real quick about like throwing Anhyzer, in the simplest form, you throw Anhyzer, like I said in the beginning, with the outside of the disc pointed up or higher than your hand is where you're holding it. That is what it looks like when it comes out of your hand on your throw. But for this practice, what we've been doing the last couple of weeks is talking about how to throw hyzer, flat, and Anhyzer now with different stabilities. And so the Anhyzer is also talking about here kind of how to get some turn out of the disc. I'm using it interchangeably, but I just want to make sure that that's clear before I continue. Anhyzer is one thing, yes, turn is another, but here I'm sort of using them interchangeably to talk about how we're getting the disc for right hand backhand, getting the disc to go from left to right. And so if you're going to throw Anhyzer with a neutral disc, typically this is what you would do for something like a turnover shot. Now, a turnover shot, you want to choose a disc, and this is why I say a neutral disc. You want to choose a disc that has a little bit of stability, a little bit of integrity to it. Not enough to necessarily fight out early, but enough to finish flat. You see, a turnover disc is a great way to get around a curve going left to right or a dogleg right. If you can't throw the forehand because you either don't have the skill set yet, or it's just not the most comfortable shot depending on the tee pad or depending on where you might be pitching out or throwing from in the fairway. Sometimes the backhand turnover line is better than the forehand shot. And so you want to throw that neutral disc because you're going to be able to put a little less Anhyzer on it than if you were throwing an overstable disc, and the disc is going to work with you. The reason you don't want to throw an understable disc for your normal turnover line, there might be some extenuating circumstances, but in most circumstances, you don't want to throw too understable of a disc for this on a turnover line because the disc will turn too much. And it's really just then going to turn into a roller, which is something we'll talk about later. So you want to choose something that's more neutral, will hold the line that you put it on, but have enough stability or integrity to finish flat, and that will help reduce skips and rollaways when it hits the ground. The other way to throw an Anhyzer line, or to get the disc rather to move left to right, is to throw an understable disc flat. Now, the reason I say flat is because if it's a really understable disc, it's going to turn, and it's potentially going to turn into a roller, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But one thing to keep in mind with an understable disc is that a lot of them, in my experience, is understable discs have a lot of glide in order to kind of get that turn, and then for most of them, some fade at the end. There has to be a lot of glide on it. And it could just be kind of the way the discs, the way the physics handles it, like turn is going to have a lot of glide. You don't really see, I can't think of any off the top of my head, understable discs with zero glide. I just don't know that it works that way, like physically. But throwing an understable disc flat, one thing you have to keep in mind is that you need to give the disc air or throw it up a little higher, give it some elevation, so to speak. You don't want to throw something 2 feet off the ground and then expect that understable disc not to turn over, because it's going to turn over and it won't have enough time to turn into a roller. So it's going to kind of catch edge and then roll to the left on a righty backhand. So you want to make sure when throwing an understable disc flat that you give it some good air, not necessarily up into the sky, but you get some air under it, some good elevation, maybe 10, 20 feet up in the air, so that the disc can pan and turn to the right and give you that sort of Anhyzer line that you're looking for depending on what the shot is calling for. That is sort of those three stabilities. The simplest way to throw an overstable disc on Anhyzer is with a flex line. a neutral disc for turnover, just releasing it on some Anhyzer, and then an understable disc flat. Now, as I've mentioned, you also have a roller. Now, this is where it becomes very specific to the player, because I was watching Idlewild earlier today. Before recording this, I was catching up on some coverage, and I saw Kevin Jones throw the Prodigy Reverb, which is 13504. He threw that on a roller line. Now, I have a reverb that I got from OTB. I reviewed it. It is stupid overstable. Now, I just don't have the arm speed, especially for overstable distance drivers. But the fact that he threw that on a roller, what I'm getting at is you need to one, practice your rollers and with different stabilities, and because they're all going to react differently. So like if I tried throwing the reverb on a roller, on a backhand roller, it might fight out of that Anhyzer line before it potentially hits the ground because it's so overstable. But for Kevin Jones, it was probably a more seasoned one. He's probably been throwing it all year, and so he was really comfortable throwing that disc on a roller line, even though it started off really overstable. And so for most players, you are going to want to choose an understable disc for a roll line. There are very few players, unless they're looking for a specific roller line, they're going to throw understable discs. And I mean like understable discs for anyone. Avenger SS is a popular roller disc for Discraft pros. You can take destroyers and roll them. I think the Enforcer is a slightly overstable dynamic disc driver. We see Ricky rolling those from time to time. So you can take more overstable discs and roll them, but even still, the pros are normally going to choose an understable disc. And the roller falls under this Anhyzer category for me, even though it is a different type of throw, because the way you throw it is very similar to a flat or a turnover line, I should say, but the end result is different. So you know how I said the turnover line is with a neutral disc? Well, if you took an understable disc and threw that same turnover line, you would have a roller. So that's why I recommend, if you're trying to work on throwing Anhyzer, trying to get comfortable with it, this is something I am still working on. Anhyzer is not my strongest throw. I recommend starting with that neutral disc and working on the turnover line because that can translate to all the other ones. If you can throw that neutral disc on a turnover, you can throw that same line with an understable disc and get the roller. And then you can throw that same line with an overstable disc and get a flex line. So it's really the best way to start is with that neutral disc and then expand out from there, because then you can kind of learn that one angle that's working for you and then find different stabilities for the flex line and for the roller. But that's kind of why I threw the roller into here. Basically what's going to happen with the roller is that it's going to keep turning on that turnover line and hit the ground on an edge. And this is where it becomes really skillful because you want to be able to control how much angle it has on the ground. You don't want it to be standing upright because then it's going to fall over a lot sooner. And you don't want it to be too close to the ground to where the flight plate is pointing up because then it's going to cut roll and you don't want that. So it's this real delicate placing of your roller shot, which is why they require a lot of practice. And it's part of the reason why I haven't practiced my rollers a lot is because I just imagine it would be way harder to track all the discs down when they're rollers and you're learning them. And so I don't quite know the best way to practice rollers other than doing it. So if you have any tips on that, please let me know. But aside from just going to a massive field and throwing rollers, I'm pretty sure that's the only option that I can think of. But that is basically how you throw Anhyzer. You take an overstable disc on a flex line, a neutral disc on a turnover line, an understable disc on a flat line, and then if you want to go even crazier with your Anhyzer line, you take an understable disc, throw it on the turnover line, and you get a roller. So I hope this series that we've done the last 3 weeks has been super helpful for you. How to Throw Hyzer was 2 episodes ago. Last week 3 weeks ago was How to Throw Hyzer. Then I believe I took a break in between those two, just wasn't able to get to it. And then last week I talked about throwing flat or straight shots. And then this week, the Anhyzer line. So I hope you found that information helpful. If you have any questions about it, respond to this video. If you're listening to the podcast version of it, please feel free to message me on Discord or on Instagram, and I'll answer your question and help you with that. And if you're working on this skill in the field and you want some feedback, you're working on it, but it's not quite happening the way you want, let me know. I can coach you on GiveGo. You can send me a video for free with my discount code, and I can give you some feedback and help you accomplish your goals with disc golf coaching. So I wanted to just let you know about that. Now, same as last week, we do not have a disc review. I really apologize about that, everybody. I don't like going multiple weeks without a disc review, but unfortunately, I've been playing some rounds with beginners, and it's literally, I played with 2 people in the last week who have never played before, and it was so much fun. But because of that, I was not focusing on trying new discs, or not just even new discs to me, but discs I have that I haven't reviewed yet. Haven't had that opportunity. I was working with them, having fun, and I just want to say they both loved it. I'll talk about that more here in just a little second. But I do want to mention that our disc review, this show's disc review, is sponsored by OTB Discs. So if you ever want to get some new discs, I strongly recommend going to OTB. They are the absolute best, not just in their name. They really, really are some amazing people there. And if you use my discount code GLADIATORDG, you can save on shipping, which is huge because every dollar with all this inflation that's going on. I know things are starting to settle down a little bit, but I know groceries are still expensive. And so if you're buying discs, save yourself a couple bucks here and there. Use my discount code to save on shipping. So before I get into the the debate about who's the best MPO player this season, is it Calvin or Gannon? And we'll get into some details there. I do want to just share something. I always end every episode talking about teach, play, disc golf. Go out, teach somebody how to play, encourage someone, whether virtually or in person. Make sure you play disc golf yourself, and then just have a great round, right? I always end the episodes that way. I had one of the best weeks of disc golf because I was able to play with 2 guys on separate days who had never played disc golf before. They had heard of it, either because of me or from other people or other places they lived, but it was such a blast, and it was so much fun just watching their faces light up and seeing, after a couple throws here or there with this disc, having just being able to watch the disc in flight. And it's incredible working with someone who's never thrown a disc before on hole 1, and by the time they get to hole for some people, they learn a little bit quicker. Maybe it's hole 7, maybe it's hole 12, or maybe it's hole 15. But finally, things start to kind of click in that first round. They start to kind of figure out, like, okay, this disc is going to do this, in their very limited understanding, and then being able to do it. And it was so cool. Both guys had spectacular throws all throughout the round, and they each had one throw that I think was memorable for them, and I know it was for me. Because it was just incredible to watch. My first friend, Josiah, each of these guys played with the same 3 discs. I let them borrow a Trash Panda disc Intercore, a Discraft Comet, and a Lone Star disc Dome, and they're all neutral or understable discs. I practice what I preach, okay? And so they were using those on separate days. And Josiah had the Comet on hole, I believe it was hole 13 at Crockett. He threw the Comet and it was just a laser beam. And then on another hole, he went and threw the Dome, and it was just such a pretty straight flight. He was really liking that disc a lot. And it was just awesome because I think about those throws. I'm like, yes, this is how they fall in love with the sport. And then 2 days later, I was playing with my buddy Jared, who had never played before either, and he was using the same set of discs. And then on hole 15 at Crockett Park, he threw the Dome on a nice little Anhyzer line, and it was really pretty. But the next thing is what was amazing. Jared was about 65 feet out from the basket, and he had 2 trees directly in front of him. Now, he could go for par and just kind of pitch around the tree and settle for the par, but it was also his first day playing. So, pitching around the tree is a lot easier when you kind of know how to do it. And so he said, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make this putt. I'm going to run this birdie. So I see Jared kind of standing at his lie, lining up. Now I'm standing to the side because I'm trying to stay out of his way and not distract him, because there's this cove of trees that we're in. And so you really have to focus even if you're a veteran player. So I just saw it from the side, but all of a sudden I see this disc with steam, with some mustard on it, okay, with some heat behind it. All of a sudden this disc come in between these 2 trees from 65 feet away and just smack the middle of the chains, and Jared got his first birdie ever, and it was just awesome. From 65 feet out with the inner core, he just putted that thing with some juice, and it went right in the heart of the chains. I mean, this disc didn't just barely make it in, it hit the heart of the chains, and it was so cool to see. It was so fun to experience the different emotions with both of them, and they both had a blast, and we already have plans to meet up and play again in the future, and so I'm super excited. But I wanted to share that with you for 2 reasons: to share some of the fun disc golf rounds I've had recently, but also to encourage you to really go out, and if you haven't talked to somebody yet, whether it's at work or just friends in the neighborhood, take them out to disc golf. Keep it really simple. I strongly recommend that if you're giving your friends or coworker or family member, 2 or 3 discs that are neutral to understable, I want to encourage you to also do the same. I have a small bag that I use, so I only had a handful more discs, but I was pretty much throwing the same. I pretty much throw the same kind of stabilities. I don't have a ton of overstable discs in my bag because it's just my playing style. And so I say that because it's helpful for them to feel like, hey, you're kind of playing the same kind of game with them versus them having 3 discs or 2 discs and you're carrying, a full Ranger bag or a Squatch bag or a pound bag that's full of 25, 30 discs. Kind of keeping it simple like that can make them feel a lot better about the discs that they're using. And I would encourage you to coach them along the way if they're asking questions. Like Josiah was asking a lot of questions, and there were multiple times I told him, like, just so you know, that's a great question, but we're getting super into the weeds now about some of the stuff you're asking about, and I don't know that any of it's going to make sense, and I also don't want you to necessarily try anything that I'm telling you, but eventually it will all make more sense as you just continue to work on it. And so that was really fun, just, who was interested in what. And so basically, long story short, I just want to encourage you guys to go out there and teach some people how to play. It makes you a better player because all of a sudden you're really slowing down what you do and saying, okay, what am I going to throw here? What should they be throwing here as somebody who isn't going to be able to clear this creek or get around these trees? So kind of strategizing for them as well to help them. It really helps you develop your own game because you might realize like, hey, I've been trying this one thing and because I think I can do it, but when I told them what to do, they did something different, and that's actually the best play here. You might learn something from that too. So I want to encourage you to do that. And if you have any stories about, teaching people how to play disc golf, I want to hear them. So please reach out to me on Discord or Instagram. I want to hear about it in YouTube comments. That's great too. But that's all I wanted to say. Now let's go ahead and let's get back to our regularly scheduled program where I'm going to discuss who is the best disc golfer this season, Calvin or Gannon? We've been talking about this in my Discord server, and obviously they were talking about it on coverage a little bit. And here's the thing. I want to just say right off the bat, these 2 players are not quite, in my opinion, at the level of where we were always talking about Ricky versus Paul. There's a reason why the Ricky versus Paul debate was happening. They were winning between the 2 of them, their 8 world championships well, minus Paul's 6th one that he just won because that was a few years after his 5th one, the first 7 of the 8 between the two of them was all around the same time. It's been several years now since Ricky won a world championships. I definitely think he's still capable of doing it, and I'd love to see him get a 3rd one. But that Ricky versus Paul was because of championships, like world championships. Yes, they were winning these major events, these elite series, or really the kind of the big events before we had the Disc Golf Pro Tour. All these things. We had the, I think it was just called the Pro Tour or the National Tour. That's what it was, the National Tour. So we had these big events that then got transferred over to the Disc Golf Pro Tour. But I do not put either Calvin or Gannon on that level yet, simply because we're not talking about world championships yet. Now, for this season, I'm going to have to side with Calvin, and here's why. Yes, Calvin has 3 wins on the season. Gannon has 5. So Gannon wins that. Calvin's average finish in a tournament is on the podium. It's like 3 point something. He pretty much is finishing on the podium every single event. And remember who did that last year? Kristen Tatar. Yes, Kristen won most of the events where she finished on the podium. But that is incredible to do. The consistency required for that is impeccable. Gannon, if I remember from the infographic that I saw earlier, I think Gannon's average finish is like 11th, 10th or 11th around there. So sitting just outside like top 10 average finish, which don't get me wrong, I would be thrilled if I was on the Pro Tour with an average finish of 11th place or 10th place. Like that would be phenomenal. But so Gannon has won more, but Gannon is a little less consistent. He'll get a 1st place, right? And then he'll get a 20th place. And so you kind of have that average out now to about 10th or 11th place. Whereas Calvin is always in the top 3, more or less, because that's his average finish. And so I think Calvin is the best disc golfer this season because he's always consistent. He doesn't really have off weekends. He is always in the mix. And if you look at some of his defeats where he got 2nd place, you're looking at players who are great players because they're on tour, but I heard someone in my Discord server said this the best. He's lost to guys who literally had the best weekend of their lives. Ryan, thank you so much for sharing that comment, because when you said that, I was like, yeah, like Cole Redolin is a great disc golfer, and I think he has a bright future, but he played out of his mind last week. Calvin got 2nd, and not by much. Like he was not too far behind. I think it was 5 strokes, yes, but I mean, you're talking about someone who just played the best tournament of their life, and Calvin was only a few strokes behind him. So I do think there's some of that to consider. Now, I will say I initially had the same thought that Nate Sexton or Paul Ulibarri had on coverage. It's kind of like the MJ and LeBron conversation. Someone who's won all of them and someone who's just been really consistent. And I understand the implications because I was thinking that, but I think it gets a little too muddy because neither of these players yet are at that level of being considered the best in the game. I think their ceilings are very high. I think both of them are going to win world championships and USDGCs and have a lot of titles by the end of their careers. But I think it's a little disingenuous to start comparing them to greatest of all times, even in other sports, for comparison's sake. And so that's why I'm not even comparing them to the likes of Paul and Ricky when we had the Ricky versus Paul battles all the time, because I think that's disingenuous, because these guys are not duking it out every weekend, one thing, and then the other is neither of them have a world championship yet. Yes, Gannon has a USDGC, but this is all just my opinion. And so all that to say, I think Calvin is the better disc golfer this weekend. Even Gannon agrees with that on his Instagram story. And so I just, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. They're both playing out of their mind. They're both doing great. Super happy for them. It's great for disc golf. But I do think Calvin is the better disc golfer as of right now. Now, if Gannon wins another thing or wins a big major, that might change. But I think Vinny is totally positioned to win something big this season. And so that's kind of where I stand on the Calvin versus Gannon. I want to hear from you. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Is there a reason that I haven't thought of or that I didn't bring up that you agree with me? Or do you disagree? Because don't get me wrong, just as easily as I could argue Calvin being the number one disc golfer right now, I could also argue Gannon. Okay. There are so many different ways to gauge. Number one, you have Disc Golf Pro Tour points, you have rating, you have wins. I mean, and you consider all those things, and Calvin is 2 out of 3. He's got the rating, the higher rating, and he has the most Pro Tour points because he finishes in the top 3 every single week. But Gannon has the wins. So it now kind of just becomes this, okay, it's 2-1. And I think even if you're looking at it there, you kind of have to tip the cap to Calvin a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about all that. So let's go ahead and let's recap Idlewild, one of my favorite tournaments every year. So I love this course. It is so cool. They've made some changes over the years. I don't know if I just missed it, but I watched the MPO and FPO coverage, and maybe it was just different camera angles, but literally as I'm watching, I don't remember seeing the curvy snaky hole that we normally have seen in years past. So I don't know what happened with that. I don't even recall any commentary about it. So if you know anything about that, please let me know. But I was a little sad to not see that. But anyway, Idlewild was awesome. It was so much fun. I love this event. It's always a good one. Yes, the rainstorms did make an appearance. It definitely postponed some things. It definitely made it interesting for MPO, especially the lead card. They opted for playing in the dark versus finishing the round at 7:30 in the morning and then having to play a full round later that day. So that's what they opted for. I don't blame them. You're kind of already in the groove. You're already out there. And last thing you want to do is wake up early, play around, and then have to kind of like settle down, but then also warm up again to go play later. So I think they made a right call, and it really worked out. I think Gannon benefited the most by getting 1 or 2 birdies on the final couple holes in the dark. But the other players were kind of just neutral. Maybe they pretty much all took pars, maybe a bogey here or there, but nothing too significant in my opinion. But like I said, Gannon, I haven't said this yet, but Gannon won, in case you didn't know. No spoiler, I don't believe in spoilers here. This stuff has been out for a couple days now. But Gannon won again, which kind of is the reason why we have all been having this Gannon versus Calvin talk. But to me, more importantly, it is so good to see Valerie Mandujano back in the winner's circle. She's definitely one of my favorite FPO players, and she played so well. I want to strongly encourage you, if you don't, 1, watch FPO coverage to improve your game. 2, watch Valerie Mandujano on coverage or on her Instagram to improve your game. Very, very clean form. Great player, makes smart decisions. Obviously, no player is immune to blow-up holes here or there, double bogeys. They happen. But Valerie just plays a very smart and controlled game, similar to her husband, Mason. He plays a very smart and controlled game. And so I definitely would encourage you to follow both of them, but definitely Valerie if you're not, and to kind of learn from her, because her game is great. I was stoked to see Alexis Mandujano on lead card coverage for round 2 as well with her sister. I thought that was just awesome. Unfortunately, round 2 did not go that well for Alexis, and so she was off the lead card by the 3rd and final round. But the tournament overall was just so much fun to watch. That course is so cool. They've made a lot of changes, but they've been such great changes. They've made some par 4s. They made some par 3s, more reasonable par 4s. And a lot of the par 4s are super, they can reward the aggressive players, but they can also pose, it's high risk, high reward. There's also a lot of risk involved with those. So that is just really cool to see. I think one of the coolest shots, or one of the coolest holes is hole 5 or 6, where the players have to throw over water, and then there's a line of trees between them and the basket, and behind that line of trees is another small pond, another body of water, and the basket is on a slight uphill. And most of the players are trying to get as far into that line of trees so that they can approach the basket easily. Kevin Jones decides, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to throw just a mid-range off the tee. And Jeremy Colling did the, oh my gosh, he Bushnelled rangefinder. That's it. He took the rangefinder from where Kevin had done it in round 2 to see the basket. Kevin is going about 400 to 450. He's laying up, so to speak, 400 to 450 feet away from this basket, and then throwing a grenade over the trees and over the pond to get into the circle, which throwing a grenade 400 feet is just absolutely insane. Throwing grenades to me are hard. I don't really throw them ever, but I've just heard about how hard they are. And also the fact that you're throwing it 400 feet when I'm like, I wish I could just throw a normal shot 400 feet is just really difficult to imagine. So that there are a lot of really cool shots, a lot of really cool opportunities for players to score. And I just think the risk reward factor at Idlewild is so entertaining. I will say I do agree with Nate Sexton on his observation in round 1 or 2. I think it was round 2 actually, where he talked about it doesn't make sense for there to be OB, that like short OB on holes where if you miss the fairway, it's already super punishing. It doesn't really seem necessary. I do wish there was a little less OB where it didn't need it to be unless there was safety concerns, but it did seem on some of the holes that the OB was placed there, but it's a little arbitrary because it's not necessarily an unsafe position to be. But I also like to err on the side of no OB unless it's 100% necessary for safety or those kinds of things. But just to punish a player when they've already missed the fairway, hit a tree, rolled backwards, and they're already in jail, unless of course you're doing it for speed of play, which I understand. But overall, I would like less OB on every course, not just Idlewild. But yeah, so that is Idlewild in a nutshell. I like this tournament a lot. It's always super fun to watch. It always is competitive. So let's go ahead and let's recap the final standings. So we had number 1, Gannon Burr at minus 32. Only 2 strokes behind him, Calvin Heimberg at minus 30. In third place, Isaac Robinson at minus 28. Fourth place, Paul Ulibarri at minus 26. We have not said Paul's name either in a long time or at all this season in the top 10. But I believe if I saw it correctly, Paul went 23 under the final 2 days to get him into fourth place. He was tied with Kyle Klein at minus 26. Sixth place, Nico Lacascio at minus 25. Tied for seventh, Nate Hecker, Matty O, and KJ at minus 24. And then tied for 10th, Ricky, Ezra Robinson, and Matt Bell and Jeremy Colling at minus 23. So 9 strokes separating the top 10. Very cool finishing. And then FPO, we have Valerie Mendijano at minus 9 winning the tournament. And once again, Owen Scoggins, second place, minus 3. Third place, Holland Hanley at minus 1. Fourth place, we had a tie with Missy Gannon and Madison Walker, which is awesome. They both shot even. Sixth place, we had Sarah Hokum, Cadence Burge, Berger Burge, who's, I believe, only 16 years old. Lucky Lorenzen, Hannah Wen, Chantel Bedinsky, and Kat Murch all tied for 6 at plus 4. And then 10th place, Macy Vela Diaz at plus 5. Macy had a great first round, but then her second and third rounds were a little rougher. But that's okay. She's a lot of fun to watch play as well. But that is Idlewild. And I am super excited for this upcoming tournament. This weekend, starting on Thursday, we have the Discraft Great Lakes Open. Now, I'm a little confused here, and it could just be that I misunderstood something, but it sounded like people were talking about how Idlewild was stop 13 of 13, but maybe I misheard and it was stop 12 because DGLO is a Disc Golf Pro Tour Elite Series. So I may have just misheard something, but anyway, I am super excited for this. This is up in Michigan. This course has a ton of elevation. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to see a lot of distance drivers. We're going to see a lot of cool lines. You know, the last 3 weeks we've talked about throwing Hyzers, throwing flat shots, throwing Anhyzers. All three of those all three of those types of throws with the different stabilities are going to be on display this weekend. So as you're watching DGLO, I want to encourage you to keep an eye out for those things and to learn and watch the pros do that. One thing that I am super excited about for DGLO is coming all the way from Japan. We have Manabu Kajiyama coming all the way from Japan. He is a 1056 rated player. I believe he is not considered number one in the world because he really only plays over in Japan. But according to PDGA, his rating is 1056. Manabu is sponsored by Prodigy. And if you're fairly new to disc golf, you may not know who Manabu is, but I want to strongly encourage you to go on YouTube and look up some events from years past, especially in Japan. And he is a great thrower of the disc. Manabu has some incredible form, very smooth player. I would say comparable smoothness in my experience to Dr. Smooth himself, Kale Leviska, who's also Prodigy. And so Prodigy just has a really good team this year. It's been actually very surprising. Not that I doubted those players, but just given all the controversy that was surrounding them at the start of the year. So I'm super excited that Manabu is in the house, that he is in America, and that he's playing at DGLO. It will be a lot of fun. I haven't seen his name in any other tournament yet this year, so I'm excited to see him play. I imagine he's probably going to be here for the next few months because you have Worlds coming up, I believe in September, if I'm remembering it correctly. And I cannot wait to talk about that in a couple weeks. But yes, DGLO, fun track, a lot of elevation. We're going to see flex shots. We're going to see hyzer flips. We're going to see downhill shots. We're going to see uphill shots and stability and wind and the angles. Everything we've been talking about in our disc golf tips the last couple of weeks are going to play into this. So I'm super excited for that. I hope you can watch it and learn some things from the pros about that. I will be picking my Grip 6 picks and sharing them on Instagram and on Discord. But that is all that I have for you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I want to encourage you, just like I said earlier, go out and teach someone this week how to play. Be an encouragement to them in person or virtually. Send an encouraging word. We need more encouragement in disc golf, more positive coaching, more positive reinforcement. And then make sure that you also get to go out and play some disc golf this week. We're having some hot weather here in Tennessee, and it's been hot, but it's been good because it's always fun playing disc golf no matter the weather. And that is all that I have for you, everybody. I hope you enjoy this episode. Make sure that you subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening for this podcast. Thank you so much, everybody. And until next time, have a great round.